Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to have a discussion on the topic of clinical trials for drug development. So we will be covering our topic under the following points of discussion. Please stay tuned to the end of this video. It will be a very informative one. We have tried to condense clinical trial as much as possible. So let us take one heading at a time. So let us first understand what do we mean by the term clinical trial. Now clinical trial basically means any systematic study. Now this systematic study will be of either a new drug or an investigational new drug, and since it is a clinical trial, so it will be done in case of human subjects. The aim is to generate the data for discovering or verifying the clinical effects, the pharmacological effects including the pharmacodynamics and the pharmacokinetics, and the adverse effect. And what is the final objective? The final objective is to determine the safety, efficacy or the tolerance of such new drug or investigational new drug. Now this is the definition of clinical trial according to the new clinical trial rules of 2019. So before the initiation of clinical trials, certain ethical principle needs to be kept in mind. Now these ethical principles have been outlined by the United States National Institute of Health or NIH, and they have identified 7 ethical principles. The first one states that the clinical trial must have a social and a clinical value. That is, whatever questions that we want to be answered, it must have a social or a clinical value. The second point is that it must be a scientifically validated question. That is, the clinical question that we are looking to answer, it must be answerable. So we cannot answer any unanswerable questions, right? And the second thing that we have to keep in mind is that the protocol, whatever we have designed for this clinical trial to be conducted, it needs to be scientifically valid. Third thing is fair selection of the subjects. The fair selection of the subjects is a very important point, since all the subjects whom are the subjects of interest who we want to be a part of this clinical trial, they must be selected fairly without any bias. And if we are not including any subjects, then there must be a proper justification as to why we are not including. Suppose we have not included pregnant women, or suppose we have not included the older age. So there should be a scientific knowledge or rather scientific reason as to why we have not included those population. Next, and a very important point, this is perhaps the most important point, that is, we must give the participants an informed consent. Now consent, as we all of us know, that consent means basically that the participant will give their yes to joining this trial, but this consent must be informed. That is, we have to inform the study participants what we aim to do, what are the risks, what are the benefits and everything. And after a thorough discussion with them and answering all their questions, only then can we take their consent. Another important point is that there must be a favorable risk to benefit ratio. Right. Next point to consider is that there should be an independent review. That is, whatever protocol we have formed for this clinical trial, it must be judged by another ethical review committee who has got no conflict of interest whatsoever in our own clinical trial, right? And the last and another very important point is we must respect our potential and enroll subjects. We must respect their autonomy. We must keep all the data or all the informations very confidential. We must allow them, if they want to quit the trial, we must allow them to do so and not harm them in any way, shape or form. Now a clinical trial is classically divided into 4 phases. So the first phase That is, these 4 phases are phase 1, 2, 3 and 4. The first phase is also known as the dose escalation study or the human pharmacology study. Phase 2 is also known as the therapeutic exploratory trial. Phase 3 is known as the therapeutic confirmatory trial or the comparative efficacy or the pivotal trials. And phase 4 is known as the therapeutic use or the post-marketing studies. Now, besides these traditional 4 phases, there is another phase which is classically not a part of the clinical trial or the classical phase of the clinical trial, but it has been developed rather to save time as well as expenditure, and that phase is known as the phase 0 of the clinical trial. So now, prior to starting the phase 1 of the clinical trial, we have to fill up a form which is known as the IND form. This IND or the investigational new drug form, after we have filled up and sent to the appropriate licensing authority, and once we get permission from them, only then we can start our clinical trial. So coming on to the phase 1 of the clinical trial. Now remember, this is the first phase that is done in the humans, because prior to clinical trial there is the preclinical trial of the drugs, but those are all done in case of laboratory animals. So this first phase in human is the phase 1 clinical trial. Now remember that the subjects are usually healthy volunteers. Normally we do not take patients in the phase 1 of a clinical trial. Occasionally there can be patients for advanced or rare diseases. Patients are normally considered, suppose, for a cytotoxic drug, where involving a healthy volunteer may lead to more adverse effect than the benefit. As we have already told that the benefit must always outweigh the risks. So usually in case of phase 1 clinical trials, we take the healthy volunteers. The number of participants are small. It varies from 10 to 100. It is an open label study. That means there is no form of blinding. The aim of this study is to determine the safety and tolerability of the drug. Please remember one more thing. Efficacy of the drug cannot be judged in phase 1 clinical trial. So what we aim to judge is safety and tolerability of the drug. Time taken varies from 1 to 2 years. The cost lies somewhere around US 10 to 15 million dollars, and the success rate is 50%. That means chances of a drug going from phase 1 to phase 2 of a clinical trial will be 50%. Now once the phase 1 is completed, next phase is the phase 2 of the clinical trial. This is the first phase where the patients are usually enrolled. As I said that in normal cases, in phase 1 of the clinical trial, it will be the healthy volunteers, except for a few cases where we involve the patients, for example cytotoxic drugs. So the first, in case of a phase 2 clinical trial, normally first time a patient will be a part of this trial. Number of participants will vary from 50 to 500. The type of study will be a randomized and a controlled study. Even it can also be a placebo controlled study. Blinding may be found in the phase 2 of a clinical trial. So what we saw in phase 1? In phase 1, it was an open label study. There was no blinding. The aim of this study is to determine the efficacy and the dose ranging. So in phase 1, what we found was safety and tolerability, and I already told you that efficacy is never judged in phase 1. Efficacy is always judged in phase 2. The time taken varies from 2 to 3 years. The cost varies from 20 to 40 million US dollars, and the success rate of a drug moving from phase 2 to phase 3 will be 30%. So once a drug clears the phase 2 clinical trial, next it is going to be a part of the phase 3 clinical trial. This phase 3 clinical trial is again where we consider the patients. Number of participants in this case will be larger. So the participants varies from 300 to 3000. In most of the cases, or usually we find that it can also be multicentric trial. That is, not the trial is not limited to one single center. It is also a randomized and a controlled study, as we saw in phase 2 of the clinical trial. It can also be placebo controlled, even it can be uncontrolled. And again you may see blinding in this phase 3 clinical trial. The aim of this study, now in phase 2 of the clinical trial, we first established the efficacy, but the number of participants were limited. But in this case the number of participants is more. So we confirm the efficacy of the drug in a larger population. Now the time taken varies from 3 to 5 years. The cost varies from 50 to 150 million, and the chances of a drug clearing a phase 3 clinical trial varies from 25 to 50%. Now once a drug clears the phase 3 of a clinical trial, it has to fill the NDA or the new drug application form. Now once they get clearance from the NDA, then they have sent this form to the licensing authority. Then once they get clearance from this licensing authority, after that the drug is going to come into the market. So after you have finished phase 3 clinical trial, you fill the NDA. Once you get approval from the licensing authority, after that the drug is going to come into the market. Now once the drug reaches the market, the phase 4 clinical trial starts. In this case, remember, so far whatever we have done, it is with the investigational new drug. Now in phase 4 clinical trial, the subject receives the approved drug. That is, the patients who are given treatment to the approved drug. The number of participants may be many thousands, since the drug is in the market. So everybody who has access to the drug may use it if they need it. This is again will be open label study. The aim of this study is basically to observe the adverse events, the compliance of the drug, and the drug-drug interaction. There is no fixed duration, and the cost of this trial is variable. Now here I would like to discuss one more thing. So far we have come across the word efficacy. Now please remember, when we use the word efficacy of a drug, it basically means that what is the therapeutic efficacy, or what is the desired effect of the drug, but in a stimulated environment, that is in the environment of a clinical trial. Once the drug reaches the market, once the drug is in the clinical scenario, then the word that we use is not efficacy, but it is actually effectiveness. So the efficacy of a drug basically denotes its therapeutic efficiency at the simulated conditions, such as a randomized clinical trial, whereas effectiveness of a drug basically determines its therapeutic efficiency at the normal scenario, that is, or rather at the market conditions, at the real life situations rather. So moving on to the phase 0 of the clinical trial, as I have already told you that phase 0 of the clinical trial, it is not a part of the classical clinical trial. The classical clinical trial will have 4 phases, 1, 2, 3 and 4. But phase 0 of the clinical trial has been developed to save time and expenditure. It is not a mandatory phase of the clinical trial. It is known as the microdosing human study. It is done before the phase 1 of the clinical trial. And remember, in this case also, the subjects are healthy volunteers. But the dose that we give, the testing dose that we give, it is 1/100 of the estimated human dose. That is, the dose is 100 times lesser, or maximum dose of 100 microgram. The aim of this phase 0 clinical trial is to study the pharmacokinetics of the drug. And this pharmacokinetics of the investigational drug is worked out with the help of highly sophisticated instruments such as an accelerator mass spectrometry AMS with a radiolabel drug, or even with a liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry LCMS-MS, which will ultimately measure the low drug levels. So the aim is what, since if such low levels of the drug they fail in this pharmacokinetics department, then it does not make much of a sense to go further with the studies. But another disadvantage is that the dose that we are giving, it is very low, right? It is 100 times low. So once you receive the full dose, the pharmacokinetics in case of a full dose may be completely different than the dose when it is 100 times low. So that's it for today, guys. Hope you like this video. If you like it, then please share it and give it a thumbs up, and do subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. And we hope to see you very soon. Until next time, thank you.